Well, welcome to everybody, and welcome to Dr. Ian Bailey. And we're here to do a little interview. Dr. Bailey is the 5th recipient of the Myers Lecture Series recognition. So we are delighted to have you here on campus and welcome you. And I know you've had a pretty busy day today, and I hope everybody's treated you pretty well. Is that right?
Pretty well considering the company, yes.
That's great. So we're going to talk a little bit. I'm going to just ask some questions. We're just going to, we're going to have some fun. We'll keep it light and easy, and hopefully we can. Our goal is to kind of learn a little bit more about you, and to learn a little bit more about maybe what motivates you and what kind of makes you tick. So that's kind of where we're at. As I had the opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more about you, I found out that there's a lot of significant accomplishments and achievements. You were a private practitioner for a short period of time. You taught at Melbourne, London, Bloomington, and now almost 40 years at Berkeley. You've had almost 4 dozen research grants, and the majority of those have been in the area of low vision and vision rehabilitation. Consultant to dozens of companies, I mean literally dozens of companies on visual acuity and impaired vision issues. Been involved in the ANSI standards, the International Standards Organizations. Tireless volunteer for the American Academy of Optometry, including the International Admittance Committee and chairing the low vision section. Developer of the Bailey-Levy-Logmark visual acuity chart, which I think is pretty cool, which has become the research standard for visual acuity on the planet. You are, as I can see, the authority both inside and outside of the profession on the management of the low vision patient and the optics related to low vision devices. That's a pretty impressive group of things. So,
It's probably a little bit overstated.
I don't know.
Thank you.
I don't know. I don't think so. You've been recognized by the Academy with the Fine Bloom Award for our lecture series and the Prentice Medal. Pretty impressive group of things, and congratulations on that, as well as an honorary Doctor of Science from SUNY. So pretty impressive stuff. But like I say, we're more interested in kind of what makes you tick and a little bit more about you. So, so tell me, I noticed you've got college degrees from 3 different continents. Why did we need to go to 3 different continents to get educated? Were we getting removed from each one?
I guess I was hard to educate. I started my optometric career in Melbourne. I thought I was going to become a private practice clinical optometrist, and I was going to be pretty damn good. Except I didn't know what I was doing in contact lenses. Very poorly trained, and this is in the early days of PMMA corneal lenses, and I felt inadequate. And I married immediately after graduation, and after 12 months of private practice, I decided I wanted to do something about contact lenses. There was a course being offered in London for private practicing optometrists to learn about contact lenses, a nighttime course. And so I went to London to enroll in that. When I went to London, I found myself in a full-time job in private practice straight away. And my wife got a job working in a legal office. I had to work all day Saturday, had Thursdays off, but on my first Thursday off, I went to the School of Optometry to check it out. Bumped into the head of department when I was looking in their library, and he said, "Who are you?" And he said, "Would you be interested in being a research student?" A research, because we need a GSI, we need graduate student instructor. We need them to cover optics, we need them to cover vision science, or physiological optics as it was then called. And we would want you to teach in this course, this contact lens course that you came to enroll in. And I thought, this sounds good to me, because I had just a little bit of teaching experience involved, and I knew the best way to learn was to have to be forced to teach it. And so I ended up doing that, and I became really good at contact lenses very, very quickly, and contact lenses were my love. And so I did that for going on 2 years in London. While I was there, my classmate, Tony Adams, came through. He'd been doing his graduate work in Indiana. He was on his way back to Australia via England, popped in to see us and said, "Look, while you're in the Northern Hemisphere, why don't you come to Indiana? If you came for the summer, we'd be able to get you a job teaching in the contact lens clinic, and you'd pay your expenses just a little bit. Or if you came for 12 months, we could probably get you a job working with a graduate student instructor, teaching in the contact lens clinic, getting contact lens experience here in the United States, and you might be able to pick up enough for a master's degree. And so I said, that sounds pretty attractive to me. So we went off to Indiana for 12 months and became much better at my vision science and had learned a lot there, and returned to Melbourne to take up a job as head of the clinic at the School of Optometry in Melbourne. At this stage, 67, I was 26 years of age, but I was head of the clinic. I was the third full-time staff member of the School of Optometry on the teaching side of things. And there, because I'd had these courses in Indiana and London, they said, we want you to teach neurophysiology of vision, we want you to teach optics, we want you to teach the contact lenses that you become good at, and general optometry. And I was doing everything, sort of taking care of disputes between the reception staff at the school and try to look at the financials of the clinic and do all this teaching, and did an afternoon of research with a graduate student, Leo Carney, who's become an important person in optometry. And this is all contact lens research, and then I sort of stumbled into low vision, and then I got angry, resigned, made the decision to resign on my 10th wedding anniversary, after the first bottle of wine. I'd just gotten tenure, but decided to resign. Didn't know what I was going to do, and I'm not going to take you through the whole story, but there was a bit of sort of a seesaw between, will I go to New South Wales or will I go to, then later, after I'd been offered a job from there, Berkeley sort of tried to seduce me, and lots of toing and froing, and I ended up at Berkeley and been there ever since. It was a very good and lucky decision for me.
So why did you choose optometry? I mean, clearly you've got the ability, you could have done most anything. Why optometry?
Pick the most embarrassing bloody questions.
Sounds like we got a story.
Oh.
That's good.
It's not going to surprise everybody in the audience, but I was a bit of a goof off at high school. In the days that we did high school, there was a select high school that you had to have good grades at primary school to get into, and I got into that. There were only 3 out of about 30 kids that got into it out of my class. And so a pretty select high school. It was a 6-year high school system that we had then. I did that, and basically I just clowned around. I did enough to get by. I didn't do most of my assignments, and my mother forced me to go to a careers exhibition when I was in my second last year in high school, and I didn't want to go, but she made me. We got a thing on optometry, and my mother said that looks good because you might get £3,000 we had in those days per year. That looks pretty good. I ended up applying for a series of scholarships in chemical engineering. I was good at science things, and so I didn't know what optometry was. Neither of my parents had ever seen an optometrist. I'd never met an optometrist. I didn't know what they were. And I applied for this scholarship, and I got this scholarship because I was a high school student with the best grades applying to optometry, and I thought, oh, go ahead with it, because the first year in the optometry program was the same as the first year in the med program or the dental program or a biological kind of science program, and I thought, I'll leave my options open, and if I decide not to go ahead with optometry, I'll just give them the money back. So, I may as well take advantage of it. And so first year came along, and I only did so-so, but I sort of scraped through. I played cards more than I read books. And come the end of the year, I still didn't know what optometry was. I'd still not met an optometrist. I still hadn't asked. And I didn't know what the hell to do, so I thought I may as well stick with the money. It was £375. And so I went into second year, and I liked the courses, and then I had an embarrassing thing. I was at a social function, and one of my dad's friends came to me and said, "Tell me, Ian, do optometrists grind the lenses themselves?" I thought, what a smart question. I had no idea. But I very quickly became passionate about optometry, and it just turned out to be a really nice profession for me. You know, I like dealing with people. I probably got a short attention span, and was really focused on stuff. And I'm relatively good with the math and thinking, and I like problem solving, and it just turned out to be a terrifically lucky choice for me.
So a much better fit than you would have guessed.
Yes, yeah, no way I guess.
Yeah, that's good. So, as you mentioned, you spent a good portion of the early part of your career in contact lenses and having interest in that. So how did we end up becoming a low vision authority? How did that all progress?
Yeah, again, the interesting stories about my accidental academic career. That I was involved in politics, in the optometric politics in Australia, and optometry and ophthalmology didn't speak. And at one Christmas function, the head of school of optometry and the head of ophthalmology were seated at the same table as the guy that ran the Association for the Blind, which is a large institution, been around for 70 years. They had all sorts of rehabilitation programs. It was an absolutely terrific institution. They didn't have anything like a low vision clinic. The head of the Association for the Blind said, "I wish we could get you two professions together, because if we could get an ophthalmologist and optometrist working side by side, we could have a low vision clinic. It'd be terrific." And it must have been after a bottle of wine or two, because the optometrist and the ophthalmologist agreed, and the head of the school came to and asked me and said, "Look, we've got this offer to set up a low vision clinic. Jerry Crock, the ophthalmology guy, is not going to do anything about it unless we do, so we have to do something." And I said, "I absolutely agree. Politically, it's really important that we do this. We've got to, so let's get ahead and do it." He said, "Well, who can we get to?" I said, "Well, nobody knows anything about low vision, because I've been teaching it for 4 years, and I don't know anything about it. And I know the textbooks aren't good on it, because I looked at textbooks and found that they weren't. And I used to teach 4 lectures on low vision. That was their full course. But I had a special expertise. I was in charge of the clinic, as I mentioned, and as one of the things I had to do along the way was design the cabinet that the low vision aids went into. So as part of that exercise, I had to get all the low vision aids that we had, lay them all out and see how big they were, and how they fit in drawers and shelves. And so I knew what low vision aids looked like. And so I said, "I will take on the job for a few months. I'll get out there and work out how to do low vision, work out a protocol, and then I'll step aside and have somebody else do it. So I'll do this for a few months." And then when we set it up, the low vision rehabilitation, or the program without low vision care was sort of going full bore. There were patients there, potential patients there every day. We decided that we weren't going to publicise this. We weren't trying to get people to sign up for it until we understood what we were doing. That's not usually my style, but that's what we decided to do. And so we were just, the person who oversaw the whole rehabilitation program was picking out patients she thought would be appropriate patients for the low vision clinic. And the most important patient in my whole career came along as about the 4th or 5th patient. This is the story. She had cataract surgery on her left eye, and apparently when she had to have sutures removed, this was before IOLs were around, she had to go back to have sutures removed, and when the ophthalmologist put in the drops, she said, "Are they anaesthetic drops? If so, could you wait a while, because anaesthetics always take a long while to work on me." And he says, "Oh, don't be such a scaredy cat. This is not going to hurt a bit." And apparently it hurt like hell. And she was really upset. According to her, she cried the whole way home and embarrassed herself on the tram going home. She went home and cried all night. And the next morning she had this big dark shadow come over the eye that had the surgery on it. And she cried for the rest of the day, and that evening she went to the emergency place at the Eye and Ear Hospital, and she was told she'd had a massive hemorrhage and lost the vision in the operated eye. Here I was 5 years later, and she'd just given me this history, and I said, "Okay, now let me get to the exam. I'll start with retinoscopy." So I picked up my working distance lens and sort of waved away, and said to myself, "Stupid Ian, you should have known you weren't going to get much of a reflex out of this right eye, because she's not going to see an ophthalmologist ever again, and she's got cataract in that eye." And so I just sort of changed hands and slipped over to the other eye, holding my usual working distance lens there, and waved hands. "Stupid Ian, she's an A-fake, and you're using your standard working distance lens." So I put that back and just reached for something up that end of the trial case. Picked up a +12. She grabbed my hand and said, "I can see, I can see." And she had 20/25 when corrected. And so I did this miracle, performed this miracle. That even the worst optometry student would have been able to do just as well as I did. But all of a sudden I was truly Santa Claus, and the waiting list for the low vision clinic just expanded. The adulation, I just couldn't resist. And so I'm still working on trying to understand what the hell I'm doing when I do low vision work, and every now and then it doesn't happen quite so spectacularly, but I enjoy the adulation that I get from the patients.
Well, but there's certainly something to be said about that, feeling like a hero.
Yeah.
When you make that kind of change for somebody's life. you know. So
And that happens fairly often in low vision, when it's a real kick in the pants. That happens.
makes you get up and go to work when you make those kinds of changes. So there is a photo around that is circulated of you and Dr. Jan Lovey. Yes,
I know.
You know the photo. Apparently minimally clothed behind a Logmar chart that was taken in 1975. Now, we know that the Logmar chart has become the standard visual acuity testing for research in the U.S., Europe, and internationally. Tell us a little bit about the development of the Logmar system, and we'd like to know a little bit about the photo as well.
Okay, the system first.
I kind of figured you might go that direction.
With the after I resigned, I got some research money. I applied for a research grant before I resigned. I made the decision to resign. Did the interview for the research money. Then I got the research money and I resigned. So I had 2 years of soft money, and we were looking, in those days we were doing a lot of contrast sensitivity testing. We had some really terrific contrast sensitivity apparatus, and I thought we'd be able to apply that to, and it would have been novel doing that to macular degeneration. But we'd go to see macular degeneration patients and almost work to death. We were going to do a lot of tests on a relatively small number, 16 in the end, macular degeneration patients. And we said, how are we going to measure visual acuity? And we looked at all the charts and we said, there's nothing there that will work. And so we need more letters at the top part of the chart. And so we said, how many letters of a 2200 size can we get into a 35mm slide projector system? And we worked out that we could just fit 5 letters into a row. So and we had to choose which letters. We chose British Standard letters. We're talking about 1973, 74, and this would be about 74. And we used the British Standard letters that had been recommended in 1968. And we could fit 5 rows across the chart. And we said, well, we may as well have 5 in the next row as well. And perhaps we should have the spacing the same. And then we realised that if you change the viewing distance, the task remained the same as you went down the chart. You just went to a new region on the chart. And so to make these charts, and this was before computers were around, and we had to do it photographically, so we drew the letters, took photographs of the individual letters, made them all the same size, and then laid out rows, photographed those rows, and then cutting and pasting and all that sort of business. And we ended up making 10 unique rows that we made in 10 different sizes, and we put them together in different combinations. So there were 10 only rows, but they were in different sizes and different locations on each of 10 different charts. So we had 10 35mm slides, 10 rows each. They went from 2200 level, at the standard distance, 2200 level, down to 2025. We didn't bother. We didn't think we needed to go lower than that. We thought now we'll be able to measure people in the business part of the spectrum, this macular degeneration group, and if they can't read the 2200 level, we can move them closer, and if it's not, just move them closer to the screen. We thought, hey, this is really good. And then we said, but we've got to, and we got that going, and we said, but now we've got to organise a control group because you have to have some normals, but the normals are all going to be able to read the bottom line on the chart. So we need to add some extras, and so we need to take it down to below the normal threshold and say, well, let's take it down to the 2010 level. And then all of a sudden we said, this should be the same for every chart. Every visual acuity system should be like this. And all of a sudden we realised what we'd done. We'd standardised the task for each size level, and we went over a range that went from 2200, which is about as high as you can go on any other chart, and going down to the 2010 level, which is about as small as you need to go. And we were really, really pleased with that. And then the next little insight that we had was we had these printed up on cardboard, the big versions that you're referring to in the photograph. We had these made and printed up, and we took, this is a chart that we took out to our low vision clinic at the Association of the Blind. And we had it set up, and we had it calibrated for the room that we were working in. And we worked out the logmar system. People hadn't used logmar as a means of recording visual acuity results, and so, but we sort of cottoned on to that. And then we were going to open up a second room as the clinic got busier, and the new room had a different length to it, and we had to make a change in the calibration, and so I had to got down and started to do the arithmetic to see what factor we had to add to the logmar score to adjust for the new viewing distance. And I thought, oh, I should make up a table of this. It's fun to make up a table. And then all of a sudden I realised one of the big advantages of those sorts of charts is that you can change over a lot of distances, and it's very easy to make the adjustment for viewing distance. And so, you know, we sort of sniffed around the edges before we realised how universal it was going to be and how advantageous it was to clinical measurement and being able to give letter by letter scoring and things like that. It's just a lucky break. And often when I think about it, I think that if you gave that task to a smart bunch of first-year psychology students who you'd say, here's what I want to do. I want to have some large letters and some small letters, and I'd like them to go down and design a chart for me. Forget that no one's ever existed, but just design a chart. I think it would take, there'd be some smart kids that would tumble onto that pretty quickly, because in the end it's pretty logical. Make the task the same size at each size level, and that means making the spacings proportional, and it means a constant ratio of size as you go from one room.
Seems to me a smart guy kind of figured that out.
But when it's there, it's like how obvious.
So how about the photo?
The photo actually wasn't taken in '75. It was taken after I was at Berkeley, and Jan Lovey came to stay with us, and we had a multimedia department in those days, so we had photographers in-house, and that I had been at an academy meeting. I'm going to stretch this this out. I've been in an academy meeting a year or two earlier, and I've been sitting with a young guy, Alan Reisman, sitting in the back row of a class, and somebody had a fine bloom chart, and the person holding the chart in the photograph, the slide, being presented in this lecture, had a white nurse's uniform on, and they had holding the chart in front of themselves and dropping down the page and sort of covering sort of from neck to knees. And I said to Alan Reisman, I said, you know, it would be much more interesting if she didn't have any clothes on. Patients would pay much more attention. And so about 3 weeks later, Alan Reisman sent me a photograph of his girlfriend, naked, but with a fine bloom chart over her vitals. and I thought that was terrific. And not all that much later, Jan came to visit, and I said, hey, we could fit 2 of us behind a bloody chart. So Jan and I went into the School of Optometry and got prepared and stood behind the photograph. And my wife doesn't like me to make this comment, but often when I've shown that photograph, I say, oh, Ian Bailey's the one with the biggest smile on his face, but he's got both hands showing. I don't know why I say that. And frankly, I don't see the joke.
I can understand why she doesn't want to. All right. So if it wasn't optometry, where do you think you would have ended up?
I honestly don't know. I haven't thought about that too much. When I have grandchildren, and when they were going through that magical age from about 6 months to 2.5 years, where they just go through this sort of skyrocketing development, speech development would be something that would just absolutely fascinate me. You know, how people learn, get their language together, because it happens so rapidly and so easily, and there's so much nuance in when kids have limited vocabulary, about 20 words or something like that. They know how to use them, and they'll have 3 different ways of saying no, but they never use it the wrong way. You know, just language development, and seeing it in your own grandkids and seeing it change. Our both grandkids, their cousins, they're virtually the same age, they're 19 days apart, and we see them each week. And to see the development of language week by week, and there are changes week by week, just blew me away. And if I was starting an academic career again, that would be something that would interest me. I'm not starting any careers.
Well, I don't know. You have plenty of time left. Yeah. So. Who were your mentors? Who influenced you in a big way?
Yeah, Barry Cole, the head of the department in Melbourne. Barry Cole became head of department when he was about 28 years of age. We were his first second-year class, his first real class actually, and Tony Adams, Don Mitchell, who has had a distinguished academic career in the Department of Psychology at the University of Dalhousie, Canada, and 2 New Zealanders with the entire class. I'm 20% of the class. I was about the middle of the class. And Barry Cole, we read the literature. I read each issue of the Archives of Ophthalmology, American Journal of Ophthalmology, the British Journal of Physiological Optics, the Yellow Peril, as we used to call it. Not the right thing to say, but the American Journal of Optometry and Physiological Optics, as it then was. And we used to read all those journals, and he made us do experiments that should have been done in graduate school, but this guy was just pushing us, and that's, I think, one of the reasons we ended up, so many of us ended up going into scientific careers and doing relatively well at, because we got this pretty intensively. There was a book by Ogle called Researchers in Monocular Vision, which is a pretty sophisticated book, but we do it backwards. We put it every which way. And so we were just lucky with that. In London, I'd say my mentors were pretty much zero, apart from a few discussions with the people who didn't interact with me in my own area, but they were smart people. Gordon Ruskell and Charlie Bedwell were the two people that I most impressed me and I got along intellectually best with. Gordon Heath was terrific at Indiana, and I've had the luck to work with a whole bunch of people along the way. Some of them are in this room, and having people around to interact and sometimes guiding them, but often they're guiding you. I've been pretty bloody lucky.
Often those people just kind of come into our lives.
Yep.
So you've been around in optometry now for darn near 50 years,
yeah.
and everything.
50 years.
And you're still at it.
Yep.
And so what motivates you? I mean, what makes you get up in the morning and go do it?
I love not understanding what I'm doing. It's a good feeling, you know, just to say I understand a lot about this, but there are things that I'd like to know better. And I do a day a week in the low vision clinic. It's not a lot, but I'm always feeling new challenges and having old questions reoccur to me, and other times brand new questions. And often asking what's wrong with the test, what are we dipping out on, what are we. Almost when every patient leaves, I say, what should I have done that I didn't do? And I encourage the students to think that way, you know, as the patients leave, to say, you have shortchanged every patient you ever see. There are things that you could have, you know, you would have been better off had you known better. And so I just think that way. So I've always had a quick propensity to, can I say the word bullshit in this? I'm just to drop that word and think that word. You know, I'm skeptical even about my own beliefs. I don't believe it's, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your wife, Val.
She's lovely. One of the most important choices I've made in my life. We became boyfriend. I've known Val since 1946. So I don't remember 1946, but I do not. We both went to the same primary school, but she moved away from the area, so we ended up going back to the same high school, and this is sort of grade 7 level. She came to that school, and I recognised her as being a girl who used to be at my primary school. And we just sort of, we didn't interact much with each other, and didn't have anything to do with each other really, but we sort of in the same social circle, just a little bit of overlap. It was when I was in my final year of high school that we went on a picnic with a bunch of friends. They were guys that had just started their pharmacy program, and Val had some mutual friends, and we sort of ended up doing a little bit of cuddling on the way home from that picnic, and haven't been the same since. And so that was 50 years ago. And we went together for 5 years. So in Australia in those days, when you completed high school, you went straight into your professional program. So that after my last year of high school, I had 4 more years of going through the optometry program, and we finished the program in December, and we married in February. So aged pretty good. She was 21, and we married since. 2 kids, 2 grandkids.
Does she work or?
She's had an interesting career. We came from poor working class sort of backgrounds, and even though she was in the select group intellectually, sort of going to this sort of hard to get into school, just before her 15th birthday, she was taken out of school and sent off to work. She worked in a real estate office because girls were going to get married and have kids and do the washing and cooking. And she's not good at washing, but she's a terrific cook. And that's what she did. And she did a little bit of night school related to real estate, and then after we came back from being in England and Indiana, she did some night classes part-time classes, and got what is equivalent to a sort of high school graduation level, and then we came to Berkeley, and for the first year or two at Berkeley, she took a few classes at Berkeley. We were very friendly with the guy that was head of the director of admissions and records. He was called. He was in charge of all the enrollment process at Berkeley, and so he sort of finagled a few things and got her admitted to a few classes. And she did very well. She was taking up admission classes and getting A's in them. So she did a few courses at Berkeley, went off to Mills College, where she began as a part-time secretary to the guy that looked after the graduate program, an old professor guy. And she had a career of about 10 years there. In the end, she changed the office and she became director of graduate admissions at Mills College. At age 50, she decided she was going to pursue a degree. So she went to Berkeley and did she had a few credits but not many, and basically 3 years to complete her degree at Berkeley, and she got a sort of Phi Beta Kappa 3.8 GPA in women's studies, and then she thought she'd do a professional degree and ended up went to Cal State Howard with a master's degree in school psychology, and had a as a school psychologist before she retired. So she's had an interesting sort of life, limited in opportunity, because that's what society did to women in those days. But
I think you mentioned that, so that's good. So, you know, your good friend Tony Adams was here 2 years ago.
Yep.
So I have a relationship with Tony Adams, and so I sent him a note and I said, anything about Ian that you can share with me?
And I hope you don't believe it.
It seemed like a pretty credible story, actually.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share with you here, and he says he thinks you would enjoy this. So he says, while he was on sabbatical in Australia back in the 70s, late into the night after 12 hours working, we returned back to your house sharing wine, which we still do, and Ian telling more and more and worse limericks late into the night, without any sign of fatigue, at least from Ian. I was sagging, tired, sleepy, and obviously Ian laughing less and less as the limericks got more and more off color. Then all of a sudden Ian announces, I have one last one and that's it. Expecting the worst, but pleased to hear the announced end of the stream of limericks, with sleep on the horizon for me, Ian emotionally delivered the following limerick. There was a young man called Clyde who fell in a toilet and died. Now that's sad, said Ian. His unfortunate brother fell in another. And this is tragic, says Ian. And now they're interred side by side.
And that is a good limerick.
He goes on, he says, this was the first limerick of the hundreds I have heard Ian tell over the years that could possibly qualify as clean, but like all others, it was good, fundamentally funny, and masterfully delivered without any hesitations that Ian sometimes includes in his lectures and conversations. Ian waited a minute, then said to me, now that's funny, I don't care what you say.
Because he'd stop laughing.
So tell us a little bit about limericks, and I'm just going to remind everybody, limericks are usually short poems. They can be humorous, they can be a little bawdy, they can be nonsensical, usually 5 lines, and usually the rhymes are the same on the first, the second, and the fifth line. and then separately rhyming on the third and fourth line.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit about limericks with you, and if you can think of another one that's appropriate for the group.
If you really wanted limericks, we should have changed the water.
I don't know if we have another
I've always liked dirty jokes. At high school, I had a good repertoire of dirty jokes, and limericks were just part of the dirty joke person's repertoire. And so I had a lot of limericks that just can't scrape off the bottom of your shoes. You know, they're with you at all times. And I just like them. And they're invariably, you know, they're very few don't have some sort of sexual or toilet humor reference. And that's nice. When I was secretary of the faculty at one stage, I used to write a limerick. I had to do the minutes, and I always wrote a limerick about that had to do with Carter. I think had to do with fart or something like that. There was Larry Stark. I remember making rhymes with him. And so limericks have always been attractive to me. My grandson likes limericks. Also, a favourite one was that Clyde one, which hasn't slipped in the repertoire. One time I was embarrassed. I was giving a talk to an albinism group, and the woman who introduced me knew me pretty well, and she said, Ian, those limericks, and they said, hey, tell me a limerick. And so I told them this limerick, which was the cleanest one I could think of at the time, that there was a monk from Siberia whose morals were somewhat inferior. He did to a nun what he shouldn't have done, and now she's a mother superior.
So they would include ones.
And I really have to stretch to
I'll let you off on one.
Thank you.
What would, and looking at the span of your career and your body of work, if you will, what would you point to as your most lasting or most significant contribution or accomplishment thus far?
I think two things. I think in understanding of optics related to low vision, I think I made a fairly solid contribution, and that's relatively important. I think I've changed the way things go. There's nothing in there that's sort of spectacular. So, my God, how the optometry did that. It was just sort of doing a whole lot of small bits and putting them together coherently, and that I think will just change the way optometry works, or low vision optometry works. The other thing that's probably more important, and Tom and Mark Broadmore were strong participants in this, but looking at being aware of the merits of fine scaling, letter by letter scoring of visual acuity, and when grading things, we in I think important paper that we wrote on clinical grading. We used cataract as the example in those days. When people graded cataract, it was either grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, or grade 4. Somebody might come along and say it's grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, or grade 5, but basically it was the same system. And we basically showed that was absolutely insensitive to change, that you should be interpolating between that, and we suggested that decimalisation was an appropriate way to go for that. And so going for finer scaling, better clinical measurement, was something that Tom, Mark, and I, and genetic engineering, I guess, too, contributed. And I think that's something that I feel best about. You've done Tom the world. Probably that.
What counsel or guidance would you have for the profession over the next couple of decades? We hear a lot about what may be going on and all sorts of things about healthcare and all that kind of thing. What guidance would you have for the profession over the next couple of decades?
to the individuals in the profession, just think about how much more you could do and doubt, just question your fundamental belief, your fundamental trust in your common techniques. Just continue to challenge. The services and the care that we provide our patients should be directed at the patient's problems. We should try to understand the patient's problems more. Sometimes the emphasis gets lost a little. We get tied up in the technical side of the issues that we're dealing with the treatment of the eye disease, or the way of analysing the eye disease and quantifying without sort of asking the patient questions. And so having the patient's problems and as I was preparing today's talk, I was thinking the fundamental responsibility of optometrists is to optimise the visual functionality of our patients. And that's it, and we should be thinking about that most of the time. And so I hope that optometry doesn't let some of its optical expertise slip, and some of the special insights that we have about the way the visual system works, and the way the things that people need to do or can have done to make the visual system work better. We don't need to lose sight of that, and I worry a little bit that some of those important things are going to get buried in our own love of technology and new areas.
Well, it was an excellent point. Remember what brought the patient in.
Yeah.
What are they really looking for?
Yeah.
Can you address it?
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes we get caught up in all the other stuff and don't address what really brought them in.
You asked me earlier about my mentors, and when Barry Cole, who was head of the School of Optometry in Melbourne for about 40 years, that he wasn't in a particularly experienced position, but he often served as a clinical instructor, and he commonly began. Why did the patient come in? What was their problem, and what are you going to do about it? And often you lose sight of that. You say, I found this patient at my or I found some astigmatism that they didn't know. Why did they really come in? What was their real problem, and how are you going to address that problem? And so that was an important lesson.
Oh yeah, it's an important reminder. What kind of life lessons can you think of that you would want to share with the group here? And obviously some of the folks in this group have been, you know, students of yours that you've been able to share some of those lessons with maybe in the past, but what kind of, are there life lessons that you would say, boy, this was really an important thing for me in understanding and becoming better at what I do?
I'm not very self-reflective.
Well, here's an opportunity.
That basically have fun and enjoy what you're doing. You know, that's the major thing. And there's a lot of fun to be had in optometry. You know, you're dealing with, you've got a special bunch of technical knowledge up your sleeve because of your optometric training. All individuals have slightly different takes on how to do things and what they and got their own ways of doing things. You should think about those, think about your patients, and say, most of the time I don't quite get it right. Just most of the time I don't quite get it right. I don't quite understand what I did, what I did. Self-doubt. Ignorance.
Keeps us honest.
Ignorance is bliss in more ways than one.
If you could redo something in your life, what would it be?
I probably might have been better off had I had a better a formal research training. I didn't intend to get into research. I stumbled there, wasn't seeking a master's degree. I just sort of stumbled on it. Was a convenient avenue, and I might have been better at the science side of things, but I might have been less good at the clinical side of things. I think I've been truly fortunate in that I ended up with a richer than average science background for an optometry clinician, and a richer clinical background than most people in vision science, and I've to some extent straddled the fence, and I know there's a lot of people in vision science who say Ian Bailey's weak on this, or they should think Ian Bailey's weak on this or weak on that, and the things that we would expect better. And clinicians will say the same way, he's got his head up his bum, he's just trying to make too much science out of something that's more obvious. But that doesn't worry me that much. I'm just happy to have been around when I've been around, because there's been some fertile ground just waiting for some lucky guy to plough, and for a lot of it, it's been great bit of joy out of those sorts of things.
It's not a bad way to go, is it?
That's a pretty lucky way to go.
I would say. So my last two questions I'm going to combine into one, and then you can manage them as you want. What do you wish you had done? What do you wish you had done less of in life? And what do you wish you had done more of in life?
I wish I hadn't embarrassed so many people so often. But I enjoyed it at the time. I'm not particularly self-reflective about that. If I've made mistakes, I just sort of live with them, and I'm aware of the fact that I've got a lot of shortcomings, but it doesn't worry me. And so I can't really identify things that I change.
You would have wanted to have done more.
Well, I would have liked to start collecting wine at an earlier age. Truly.
I don't know if you do that in your teens, though, do you?
I only did probably about 30 before I became really serious about wine. And we spend a lot of time with the grandkids, but perhaps a little bit more time with the grandkids. There are things that lots and lots of things that I don't completely know. I've gone into oodles of projects where I've learned what I want to learn out of it, and I've not published them. And sometimes I feel guilty about that. I feel a bit embarrassed that there's stuff that I know, stuff that I have in my knowledge base, my belief system, and lots and lots of things that I should have published that I haven't published. And sometimes there are things, probably lots of things that I could have published with Tom, and to some extent that's been a negative in his career development. He would have been better off to have a longer list of publications, and we could have squeezed out more publications if I hadn't been for, because I was the guy in charge then, had I been more diligent about getting pen to paper with my research. That's something of a regret, I guess.
With your permission, I'd like to let other folks ask questions if they have any.
But like him.
Rosh is off the table in terms of questions. Okay, anybody? Tom?
You mentioned your parents, and that your beginnings were maybe a little bit humbler than for an academic. But did they get to see how you turned out?
Yeah, my mum's still 97 and she's kicking, and I spoke with her last night from the Blackwell Hotel, actually. She's lovely, and she's sort of pleased with me. My dad died at age 68 as a result of lung cancer. He was a heavy smoker, and he lived in asbestos dust for his 40 years. And he was a shift worker, a labourer. used to sort of monitor turbines in a power station, and everything there was covered with lagging, it was called. And he started the day with navy blue coveralls and ended the day with white coveralls, and he did pretty well to get to that stage of his life. In my generation, I had, in Dad's family there were 7 kids, and there were 21 cousins at my level. I was the only one to go to college, but the education just wasn't expected for kids in my neighbourhood or kids in my family. As I mentioned, women were not supposed to have education, so we grew up at a time when those sort of things were a bit uncommon. And Mum often says, well, I had to keep Ian at school even though he was sent home and threatened with expulsion many times. Truly. And because my dad was a shift worker, my mum would make the appointments to see the headmaster when Dad was at work. She made sure that he didn't know anything about it, because Dad would pull me out of school. And she said, had to keep Ian at school because he wasn't good with his hands. He couldn't be a plumber or a carpenter or anything like that. And so that was my mother's main motivation for keeping me in school, that I was getting by and getting relatively good grades, but not stellar grades. And so my natural clumsiness turned out to be an advantage.
Others? You seem to have a list. Go to.
Well, I'll keep going. I mean, you mentioned sort of, the attention deficit combined with an extraordinary ability to focus and concentrate on something that's interesting to you. I mean, at high school wasn't, you weren't setting the world on fire academically in high school. You had these other habits and interests. I mean, when did you start to realize that you were, what your talents were, what level your talents were at, and sort of turn it up a little bit academically? What got the fire started?
Going to optometry school, I just found it intellectually stimulating when I got into the second year of the program and started doing the science, and so some parts of it I really gobbled up and liked, and I'd go to the journals and read and get to understand stuff. But other times there was things I should have done, and I should have gone to the journals, and I just didn't bother. I was just too lazy or too distracted. I basically survived on my adrenal gland. Having to give a lecture on a topic that you don't know about, and you crap yourself, and you sweat, and you try and get it under control as best you can. I dither around. I say I'm going to get this under control early, and I'm going to have it all written up beforehand. I just can't do that. I've given up trying. That I am better to have a gun at my head and have a dead. And often I'm working on the project before I actually appear to be working on it. But so I've been thinking about it. I've got the ideas are taking shape and starting to coalesce. But it's only when it really gets close to the wire that and I'm better than average at pulling an all-nighter, and I've got good stamina for that, and I'm just lucky with my biochemistry and those sorts of things. So my adrenal gland is largely responsible for what success I've had.
Others?
You've done a lot of work with children
Yep.
over the years. Talk about sort of what you're connected with kids, and why kids in low vision. How did that get started?
That when I started at Berkeley, I had a woman who was a graduate student in education. She was doing a master's degree in education. And she was a teacher of the vision head, and she came to see me because she wanted me to serve on her committee, and she chatted to me about her project, and about once a month she'd come to my office, and that's when you didn't fit into my office, and we chat about her research projects. And this is Amanda Hall, now Amanda Hall Newick. And she went on to do a PhD, and again I was on the PhD committee. And after she got a PhD, she went to the California School for the Blind and began an evaluation program where visually impaired kids from all over the state of California would come and spend 2 weeks at the California School for the Blind, and there these kids had a comprehensive evaluation of everything that was going, their hearing, their intellectual capacity, just everything about them got evaluated. And Friday morning was the time when she brought the kids to up to Berkeley for the vision evaluation, and because I'd seen her during her program, she and I had sort of fairly good chemistry, and we knew it. And so she would bring the patients to me, and I would work with these kids, and most of them were multi-handicapped. And so she had some ways of handling the kids that were good and insights about their vision functionality, and I had my optometry things coming out, and we worked well together, we interchanged, and she ended up preparing her kids for she would equate them with the test that she knew that I was going to be using and things like that, and we just got along very well. When Jay Enoch came to the School of Optometry at Berkeley, he said, we're going to have, after a conversation with me, he said, okay, we'll have a rehabilitation specialist that will serve in the low vision clinic. And we advertised, we had 30 applications, and Amanda Hall was one of those people. And we ended up, long story, but we ended up appointing her, and so she became the general rehabilitation specialist of the whole clinic. So she dealt with all sorts of patients, but she still attracted a whole lot of visually impaired kids and often multi-handicapped kids to the clinic. And so she and I together worked on these kids, and we realised that every multi-handicapped kid was a different exam, or the techniques that you used last time you had to throw out and think through again. And we developed some different approaches there. We used a flashing diode wand for measuring the visual fields, and we didn't design the original flashing diode wand. Actually, Ted Cohn, sort of vision science guy, sort of put it together, but we found it really useful for visual fields for our multi-handicapped kids. That Lear symbols weren't around in those days, but there were lighthouse symbols with umbrellas and houses, and we were using those for visual acuity measurement, and we didn't particularly like them, but it was the best there was. And we came up with our cereal test. That's where there's a little picture of a cereal loop, little breakfast food thing, and there's a sort of a comparison square, and the kid has to point to find the cereal, and then when they find it, you give them a little piece of cereal, Cheerio test, and so we put that test together, and was made by the multimedia department. And when we made the first prototype of that, I can remember this patient really distinctly. That was a young girl, probably about 7 years of age, and we deliberately made it so that there was an association between the task and the reward. And we would hold we'd start off with a big card, show them up very close. The kid would learn to respond. They knew if they pointed at the Cheerio, they got a Cheerio stuffed in their cake hole. Then we would back off to the end of the room and say, can you see it now, can you see it now? And then we would move in gradually until they saw it. When this first patient we tested with the prototype was doing it, she was standing on the footrest, hanging onto the armrest, leaning as far forward as she could to get as close as she could to see the task better, and it was just lovely. And so that was one of the little tests that we developed, and that's a small application test. that if the kids can do tumbling ease or more sophisticated symbols, you should give it to them. And grating acuity, I think, is probably not all. You know, it's the only thing you can do for the real infants. But this is sort of somewhere in between. You know, it's a small time frame where it's it's a good test to be doing. So not testing too much. And another test that we put together for kids was a contrast sensitivity test. And this was developed. I don't have a particularly good memory for these sorts of things, but this I know. It was in February of 1988. There was an international low vision meeting in Los Angeles, and I was going to give a talk on multi-handicapped kids. And we had developed we used to call it the Berkeley rating test, I think it was, but we actually beat teller to the teller cards kind of thing. The preferential looking technique was developed by teller. And Marty Banks brought it to the School of Optometry, and it was a big apparatus. You know, the whole apparatus was probably about as wide as this room, and there were two circles in the middle, and they had a protocol that was far too complicated. We took a few kids up there, decided we weren't going to use it, but we needed some cards, and so we went away and had some cards made. And then about a year later, Teller came out with basically the Teller cards. We put those together. I was going to talk about those for visual acuity, and we had the flashing diode, and there was we had an NEI group coming to Berkeley throughout the January, because we were trying to get about $3 million out of NEI to start up some sort of program that J.E. was leading, and he was making a lot of us work pretty hard to get this done. And the following Wednesday I had to go to this conference, and I hadn't started to prepare my talk until the Friday afternoon after I'd finished my last session with this visiting group. And so I went up to my little Macintosh computer, the original Macintosh computer. I got on there and said, the important things about the functional vision is visual acuity, visual fields, contrast sensitivity. I had nothing to say about contrast sensitivity. John Robson and I had spoken a little bit, Tom and I had put together several years earlier an edge test for contrast sensitivity. And John Robson had shown me this technique that they used in the Cambridge grading test, where you have widely spaced dots as your target, and you make the target darker in its contrast by having dots closer together. And there was a program that you could use on the Macintosh called Super Paint, where you could put dot patterns there and you could make dot pictures. And I had this realisation on the Friday, and so I worked and made this Mr. Happy test. And this is Mr. Happy test is made with a dot matrix strategy. There's a sort of circle about so big with a smiley face there, and you just make the face less and less contrasty. I made that over the weekend. On the Monday morning, I took it to the multimedia department, and that afternoon, Pat Charlie, who was the graphic artist there, made it up and made it into sort of nicely mounted cards, and we had this new contrast sensitivity test to take to this meeting on following. And we called it the Mr. Happy test because during that January, my wife and I had been to a fundraising event over in San Francisco for some school or other, and Robin Williams, the comedian, was the star of the show. His wife was associated with this school, and he kept talking about Mr. Happy. And so I thought, that's a good name for a test.
I never knew.
And so we played around with different ways of testing vision in kids that were difficult to test, either because of their very low age or because of their spot. That was fun.
Yeah.
Other questions? Very good. Dr. Bailey, we greatly appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for playing along with us here for a while. And giving
It
us
was a
some
pleasure.
information.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Good job. Very nice.
Wonderful.